I know it's taken some time. An hour into the stream, we're actually going to get to one of the main topics of it, which is this lovely little TikTok that has been going around. I want to pay attention to it because this is a thing that Trumpers have been trying to argue for a while, and that is the downward spiral that America will be faced with as soon as Trump is out of office. America is on its way to being great. Trump wasn't able to get it great in 4 years or make it great again in 4 years, but damned if he didn't try, and everything's just going to fall back. He's just going to fall backwards without everything going Trump's way. Continue. He's just trying so hard, and Biden's going to take us to communism. So let's go ahead and see. Let's go ahead and see what has to be said.
It's summer 2021. You were stubborn and voted for Joe Biden. Somehow he won. No more orange man in office.
Well, I already have one criticism. Orange man bad is quite the meme, but most people who vehemently argue orange man bad, like I do, generally have reasons as to why we think orange man bad. It's not just, at least for me, not the NPC thing, everybody hates Trump, so I must hate Trump as well. I've literally done a video on exactly why I think the dude is a fascist. So, if anything, this video's trying to talk about people like me more than likely, because I was not voting Biden in because I want Biden, I was voting Biden in because I want Trump out. But let's go ahead and see what they're trying to do. Because they're speaking about people like me, right? The people who supported Biden, not because they like Biden, but because they don't like Trump. So let's take a look.
Your life is great, right? No. Let's take a look at what you actually voted into office. Vaccines are now mandatory and forced.
Good. Fucking good. So here's the thing. As long as a vaccine can be guaranteed to not cause harm to its citizens, which right now the COVID one is not guaranteed. And even then, the antibodies don't last in the body for more than it's 36 days for the half-life, so a little more than double that for the actual time that the vaccine would give you inoculation. I can understand with that vaccine, maybe not, but stuff like measles and mumps, stuff like polio, vaccines like that, what we know are safe, that have been tested. I don't have a problem with those being mandatory. I don't. I don't see why people would. Unless they're just going to go, the vaccine's got mercury in it. I don't want mercury in my system. Well, one, the mercury that we had before in vaccines was not of anywhere near the amount required to be toxic. And on top of that, we don't really use mercury in vaccines now anymore anyway. But regardless, Joe is not trying to argue for forced vaccines. I have not seen forced vaccines as a thing on his platform. So, I'm not 100% certain what the scare tactic is supposed to accomplish, other than lie. But even if it wasn't a lie, I personally wouldn't fucking care.
Masks are now mandatory and forced everywhere.
Good! Fucking good! So there's a libertarian concept. Everybody should have the choice of what to do when you're outside. But let me go ahead and say that masks being enforced everywhere is no different to me than pants being enforced everywhere. You don't go outside and just schling your dong everywhere. You have pants. Like, you've got to go have pants. You have to do that. I don't see masks as any different, especially with the reasoning behind them. COVID is no longer just a pandemic. COVID is endemic. It is now part of our society. We failed so disastrously in stopping it, and the antibodies for it last for such a small amount of time, and it has no less than 7 strains in the United States so far. This is just going to stick with us. It's going to be like our seasonal flu. It's just around now. You didn't want masks to be mandatory? Then you should have used them during the initial spread. But you fucking didn't. It's not Biden's fault if masks end up being mandatory. It's Trump's. He had the ability to lead by example. He had the ability to get half of America on board with using the fucking things. And instead he had to engage in the Republican show of strength. which wasn't actually a show of strength at all. It ended up just getting hundreds of thousands of Americans killed. You want to say, masks are now mandatory, they're enforced. It's not going to be Biden's fault. It's going to be Trump's. Because Trump already laid the groundwork where we might need things like mandatory vaccines to save people's lives, where we might need masks to save people's lives. You don't want that reality? Then why'd you vote for it? Why did you go along with it?
You can no longer go anywhere without having both.
There's no way to determine whether or not somebody's been vaccinated. It's impossible to determine if somebody's been vaccinated without some sort of antibody test everywhere. A way to test for inoculation. It's not going to be unless they're going to try to argue that, and I would probably think that this is what they're going to try to do. Unless you want to try to make the argument that the vaccines are going to have microchips in them, they're going to be RFID, and when you have the RFID chip inside you, they're going to know if you have it, and it's going to be the first step to the mark of the beast. That's what we've had before. We've had people argue that. Fucking Spencer Smith has argued that multiple times. People like Steven Anderson have tried to argue that. Alex Jones has argued that. If you're really going to suck the teat of that conspiracy theory so hard that it can't even punch out milk anymore, eventually you've got to understand that that well is going to run dry. When 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 more vaccines are produced that don't have this magical mark of the beast RFID chip in it, that people need in order to shop, according to you, eventually you'll realize that this is no different than a standard biblical prophecy. It just doesn't fucking come true. But there are still going to be people who believe it. Every time. And I don't understand why.
They took our guns.
Biden is not going to take your fucking guns. Now, he does have Beto. And I know that Beto is decently authoritarian on guns, and I'm not a super big fan of that. But historically, every single president that we've tried to argue was going to try to regulate guns or take your guns or any of that shit didn't really happen. So this is, again, a scare tactic. Historically, this argument has been used for most every Democrat that has tried to get in office in the last 50 years, and it's never been the case. So we'll just tell them, hey, people are going to take guns the same way people like Obama took guns. And I just noticed that Brian Stevens said the same thing in the chat. He's going to take the guns the same way that Obama took guns. And then when you get the Trump supporter go, yeah, they're going to take my gun the same way Obama tried to take my gun. Bang! And then you go, yeah, and while Obama was around, you still had your gun, right? It's almost like you're huffing a lie. You are huffing a lie.
We can no longer protect our family and our homes. Crime runs rampant in the streets.
So why would crime run rampant in the streets? That's a question. I should probably also go ahead and just reload this just in case I have to be gun Suris once more. So let's just reload this guy. I've already got people like God, Gun, Guts, and Glory that try to argue that I'm some kind of predator because I have toys in my office. But I grew up poor, and I wasn't able to afford stuff like this from my childhood when I was growing up. And now I suddenly can because I have a couple extra dollars every month or so after buying food. So, fuck you. Also, there's no arbitrary argument for what I can and can't have in my own fucking office. But anyway, that aside, crime running rampant in the streets. Now, why would they argue for this? Why would they say that crime is now running rampant in the streets? Well, likely because they're going to go with the defund the police thing. Let's see if that prediction comes true. I've totally not watched this already.
And they abolished the police.
Yep, there it is. There it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about abolishing the police. Let's talk about defunding the police. Let's talk about some of the arguments that come from this. First of all, if we're going to talk about defunding the police, you have to understand that defunding it is just getting rid of its ability to easily purchase military firearms and military equipment. That's not necessarily getting rid of your police force. You could also be lowering the amount of police in a given area because there are areas that are heavily policed that don't need to be that end up having higher crime rates and just so happen to be black usually because there are more police policing those areas. You can defund the police and still have a police force. You've been doing this to the education system for years. Now, let's talk about the other thing. If you want to talk about abolishing the police instead of just defunding the police, let's talk about that. Functionally, for you to actually do that, and I think most people are smart enough to understand this, if you want to abolish the police, there's nothing wrong with that position, provided you are okay with there being a system in place that can replace them. And that system can't just be people policing their own neighborhoods, because that doesn't have the same backing in the judicial system that it would need to. So let's talk about abolishing the police. This TikTok wants to argue for that. Let's talk about that, because I actually have an abolishing the police argument that I'd like to throw by all of you. Right now, in 36 states, the police, at least at the time that I looked this up, which was a few months ago, it might have changed. I hope to God it has changed. In about 36 states, a policeman can rape you if you're a detainee. And it's not illegal. And here's why. Because even though you and I, viewer versus me, I and you would agree, definitely, that if a police officer is detaining someone, the power dynamic is shifted in the favor of the police officer. If the police officer has the power dynamic over here, and you have no power over here because you're a detainee, can we determine consent at any point in time between the detainee and the officer? And the answer to that is no. It is impossible to determine consent. This is the same issue we have with things like incest. It is impossible if a father and daughter were to engage in something. It is impossible to determine the consent of the person with less power in the dynamic scenario. Therefore, any position in here needs to be considered some type of predatory abuse. Because we cannot determine consent. It is impossible to, when the power dynamic is so thoroughly shifted. So, how do we change that? Do we try to argue with each and every single state, hey, let's change your laws about the police officers? That is an incredibly long and arduous process. We may as well go ahead and take that time and push for a new type of law enforcement instead. And on top of that, that law enforcement should not have the same breadth of protections that qualified immunity give officers right now. Because qualified immunity allows officers in certain cases to just literally destroy somebody's house without any of the officers being able to be held accountable for doing so. There are actual situations where this has happened on the books. Legal Eagle actually did a very good video on qualified immunity and situations where the cops were able to literally destroy people's houses and they were not able to be held accountable for doing so at all. So, what do you do when your judicial system is so fucked up with the police? And if you consider the way the police operate, at least here in the South, they were originally slave catchers who just evolved into local law enforcement over time. What do you do when you have such a historied, fucked up organization? You recognize that the purpose that they serve is necessary. Law enforcement is needed. The bigger and denser you get your population, the more people are going to be attacked, the more people are going to have to deal with crimes. So you create a new law enforcement organization that does not have the same protections. And when you do that, you can then slowly start abolishing your original police force. If you're going to abolish the police, as opposed to just defunding them, then have something set up beforehand, and I think I've made at least a decent argument as to why the police force in its current form need not exist without either heavy reforms and defunding, or alternatively setting up a completely different force as a replacement to them. In either case, you aren't left without law enforcement. In both cases, you still have law enforcement. But let's continue with the rest of her video.
So there's no one to call for help when you need it. They abolished the prison system. Criminals, free, everywhere. America has turned into a scene from The Purge.
No, it wouldn't turn to a scene from The Purge. The prison system as it sits right now is meant to be punitive. The prison system should be meant to be a place of reform. Now, should you still have the prison system for people who simply can't be reformed, who don't think there's anything wrong with the actions that they are engaging in that have hurt people in society? You've got to have something to do with them, a place to put them, yes. But the prison system as it currently exists is almost for profit in its nature. Some might argue that it just is for profit in its nature. So if she's going to try to sit here and go, they got rid of the prison system, now criminals are going everywhere, just like with the abolishing the police argument, you have to be able to get rid of the broken system and replace it with one that is less broken. Get rid of the prison system as it currently exists and incentivize reformism. Incentivize the prison system being something that can actually help people instead of just detaining them. America has one of the highest statistics of recidivism in crime. This is where somebody goes to prison, goes to jail, and then when they get out, they perpetrate again. Because we don't do anything to actually help people. We don't try to look at the situations that they were in, except maybe some officers on a very individual level. We don't generally try to look and see what caused this crime. How do we stop that from happening in the future? We just punish them. And we hope that the existence of punishments will be enough to keep them from perpetrating again. But that doesn't always help. It doesn't always stop things. But let's see what else she has in her video. Because there's a tiny bit left. Let's go ahead and take a look.
But this is what you wanted, right? No more Trump? You couldn't stand the thought of 4 more years with Trump. So you sacrifice America.
Every single time. Every time there is an election. On both sides. On both sides. People say that we're going to sacrifice America because of the person that we're going to elect. Sometimes they're right, like with Trump. Sometimes they're wrong. We'll see what happens with Biden. But America, like I've said in previous parts of the stream, America as it is sucks. It needs to be improved. America needs fucking therapy. I am willing to sacrifice America as it currently is to get an America that is better. An America that cares about its poor and impoverished. An America that cares about the people who desperately need health care. An America that cares about its people who end up turning to criminality because it's the only option that they have. I'm in support of making that America. Sacrificing the old to bring in a new. Now, do I think that America is going to come from violent revolution? No, I think that'd be the fastest way to stamp out our left wing. As it stands right now, we have no organization and no power to the scale required for that. But we do have our democratic system, which is piss poor and broken as it is. If you're not going to use it, then don't complain. Use the tools available to you and try to get better tools along the way. But that was the end of her TikTok video. That's the end of it. That's all she got. So, I don't understand why people think that suddenly electing a Democrat, a moderate centrist Democrat, is going to suddenly just destroy everything. Everything just goes out the window. It's gone. I don't understand it. But there are people who do it. They engage in that kind of fear-mongering. And it's almost like it's some kind of cult to them. In fact, I'm pretty sure I could argue that MAGA in itself is definitely a cult. But what do I know? I'm just one guy on the internet, looking at a TikTok and bitching. What am I doing with my life?